The cold came first as a whisper, then as a scream. I felt it seeping through the threadbare cloak they'd left me, through the worn soles of my boots, through the very marrow of my bones. The wind carried voices, laughter perhaps, or maybe just the howling of wolves. And I couldn't tell anymore which sounds belonged to the living and which to the dead. My fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Or was it 2? Time moved differently in the white, in the endless sameness of snow falling on snow falling on snow. They'd left me at the border stones. Not with ceremony, not with apology. Just left. She'll slow us down, I'd heard Vincent say, his voice flat and final as a coffin lid closing. Vincent, who had been my late mate's second, who had promised at the funeral pyre to see me safely to the northern settlements. The blizzard's coming fast. We need to move. I'd wanted to argue, to remind them that I'd kept pace for 3 days through the mountain passes, that I'd asked for nothing, complained of nothing, but the words died in my throat, as they always did. Omegas didn't argue, especially not widowed Omegas with no pack, no family, no value beyond what their mate had once provided. So I'd stood silent as they'd redistributed my supplies among the others, stood silent as they'd turned their backs, stood silent as the falling snow began to erase their footprints, as if they'd never existed at all. The wind picked up, and I pulled the cloak tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that was already inside me. This cold had been there since the fever took Daniel 6 months ago, since I'd watched the light leave his eyes and felt the mate bond snap like a frozen branch. The pack had tolerated me after that. Barely. A widow was an obligation, a mouth to feed, a reminder of death in a community that prized strength above all else. I should have known they'd find a way to be rid of me. The forest loomed ahead, dark pines heavy with snow, and some instinct, the same one that had kept small prey animals alive for millennia, told me to seek shelter there. My legs moved mechanically, each step a negotiation with a body that wanted to simply stop, to sink down into the white and sleep. How easy it would be, how painless, they said, to freeze. You just got tired, then sleepy, then nothing. But something in me refused. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the small, flickering ember of rage I'd kept carefully hidden beneath years of learned docility. They'd left me to die, had counted on the cold to do what they didn't have the courage to do outright. And some petty, vicious part of me wanted to survive just to spite them. The trees swallowed me whole. In the forest, the wind's shriek became a moan, slightly muted by the dense canopy overhead. Snow still fell, but softer here, drifting down in lazy spirals. I stumbled forward, looking for anything. A cave, a hollow, an abandoned den. My breath came in short gasps, creating small clouds that vanished instantly. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Faint, almost imaginary. But there, wood smoke, which meant fire, which meant shelter, which meant life. I followed it like a starving animal, no longer caring about pride or propriety. The scent grew stronger, and with it came another smell, one that made every instinct in my Omega biology suddenly scream awake. Alpha. Not just any alpha, but something ancient, powerful. A scent like midnight forests and winter storms, and something else. Something that made my hindbrain whisper dangerous, run, hide. I should have turned back, should have taken my chances with the cold. But I was so tired, so cold. And the smoke promised warmth. The cabin appeared like something from a fever dream, larger than I'd expected, built from dark timber that seemed to absorb the fading light. Smoke rose from a chimney, and through the frosted windows I could see the orange glow of a fire. My hand, clumsy with cold, reached for the door. It opened before I could knock. He stood there, and my first thought was that Vincent's pack had been right to fear the northern territories. This man, this alpha, was everything the old stories warned about. Tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to see his face, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that were the color of winter itself. Pale, piercing, impossibly cold. Scars marked his face, his hands, telling stories of violence survived. But it was his scent that nearly drove me to my knees. That overwhelming alpha presence, concentrated and undiluted, crashed over me like a physical force. My Omega instincts, dormant since Daniel's death, suddenly roared to life. Submit. Present, please. And I hated myself for the reaction even as my body trembled with it. Inside, he said. His voice was rough, unused to speech. Now. It wasn't a request. Alphas didn't make requests of Omegas. I stumbled past him into warmth that felt like being stabbed with hot needles. The cabin's interior was sparse. Rough-hewn furniture, furs on the floor, weapons mounted on the walls. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, and I gravitated toward it without thinking, my body making decisions my mind was too frozen to consider. The door closed behind me with a finality that should have been terrifying. Sit. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Before you collapse. I sat, because my legs had already made that decision. Up close I could see more details, the silver threading through his dark hair, the weariness etched around his eyes, the careful control in every movement. This was someone used to restraint, to keeping something caged. He moved to a cabinet, pulled out furs, and draped them over my shoulders without touching me, maintaining a careful distance. Then he ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire, soup, by the smell, and set it before me. Eat. My hands shook too badly to hold the spoon. I tried 3 times, failed, and felt humiliation burn through me hotter than the fire. I was useless. Couldn't even... His hand, large, scarred, surprisingly gentle, wrapped around mine, steadying it. Slowly, he said, and there was something in his voice that didn't match the fearsome exterior. Something almost... kind. I ate. The soup was simple but hot, and each swallow felt like life returning. He sat across from me, silent, watching with those pale eyes that seemed to see too much. They left you, he said finally, not a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Your pack? Not my pack, I managed, my voice a croak. My mates, he died 6 months ago. Something shifted in his expression, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. And they abandoned you in a blizzard. I slowed them down. The words came out automatic. The excuse I'd been given, accepted, internalized. No. His voice was sharp enough to make me flinch. They're cowards. There's a difference. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw something I hadn't expected. Anger, yes, but not directed at me. And beneath that, something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. You can stay, he said, standing abruptly, until the storm passes. There's a room in the back, door locks from the inside. He moved toward the hallway, then paused. I'm Dante, he said without turning around, and you're safe here. Whatever you've been taught to fear about alphas like me, he did turn then, meeting my eyes. I don't prey on the vulnerable. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the fire and a dozen questions I didn't have the courage to ask. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside, wrapped in furs that smelled of cedar and safety, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Warm, and for the first time since they'd left me in the snow, I allowed myself to believe I might survive the night. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls, and I pulled the furs closer. Tomorrow I would worry about what came next. About why an alpha king, because that's what he had to be. No ordinary alpha carried that kind of presence, was living alone in the wilderness. Tomorrow I would worry about the careful distance he maintained, about the weapons on his walls, about the shadows in his eyes that matched the ones in my own. But tonight, I was alive, and that would have to be enough. I woke to the sound of an axe biting wood. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in thick furs, and a window that showed nothing but white. The storm still raged, though perhaps less violently than the night before. Morning light, gray and weak, filtered through the frost-covered glass, and I lay there for a moment, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. Then it came back in a rush, the abandonment, the cold, the cabin. Dante. The rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk continued outside, steady as a heartbeat. I rose slowly, my body protesting every movement. Muscles I didn't know I had ached from yesterday's desperate trek through the snow, but I was alive. And warm. And that seemed almost miraculous. Someone had left clothes outside my door. Simple, but clean. Made for someone larger than me, but serviceable. I changed quickly, rolling up sleeves and cuffs, and ventured into the main room. The cabin looked different in daylight. Less threatening somehow. The weapons on the walls were well maintained but old, some clearly decorative. Books lined one shelf, actual books, a luxury I hadn't seen since before Daniel's death. The fire still burned, and beside it sat a plate of bread and cheese, clearly left for me. Through the window, I could see him. Dante stood in a clearing beside the cabin, splitting logs with mechanical precision. He'd removed his shirt despite the cold, and I could see the play of muscle beneath scarred skin, the white puffs of his breath in the freezing air. This was someone who pushed himself, who sought physical exhaustion like penance. I recognized it because I'd done the same thing after Daniel died. Worked until I couldn't think, couldn't feel, couldn't remember. He must have sensed me watching because he suddenly went still, turning to look directly at the window. Our eyes met, and I stepped back instinctively, cheeks burning. But he simply nodded once, acknowledging my presence, then went back to his work. I ate the breakfast he'd left, then spent the morning exploring the cabin with careful curiosity. Everything was meticulously organized, almost militarily precise. The books were histories, mostly. Accounts of pack wars, territorial disputes, political treatises on alpha dynamics. Nothing personal. Nothing that revealed who he really was, except for one thing. On the mantel, partially hidden behind a stack of maps, was a small portrait. A woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, her hand resting on the shoulder of a young man who could only be a younger Dante, less scarred, less weathered, smiling in a way that seemed impossible for the man splitting wood outside. I was still staring at it when the door opened. "Her name was Elena," he said quietly, snow dusting his shoulders. "My mate. She died 4 years ago." I turned, the portrait still in my hands, feeling like I'd been caught stealing. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "It's fine." He moved to the fire, adding logs with practiced ease. "You're curious? That's natural." "What happened?" The question escaped before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. That's not my place to..." "Childbirth." The word was flat, emotionless, but I could hear the weight beneath it, both of them. The healers said it was rare, that everything should have been fine, but... He trailed off, staring into the flames. It wasn't. The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief. I set the portrait down carefully, returned it to its half-hidden place. "My mate died of fever," I offered. "One day he was fine. The next..." I shrugged helplessly. 3 days later, he was gone. Dante nodded slowly. "You were with his pack after?" "They tolerated me. For a while." I wrapped my arms around myself. But a widow with no children, no skills they valued. I became a burden. So they left you to die. There was that anger again, cold and controlled. Did anyone argue against it? Anyone speak for you? I thought of the faces turned away, the eyes that wouldn't meet mine. No. I think they were relieved, actually. One less mouth to feed before winter truly set in. He was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the kitchen area. "Can you cook?" The question surprised me. "Yes. I mean, nothing fancy, but good. I'm terrible at it." He gestured to the shelves stocked with supplies. "Make yourself useful if you want. Or don't, but don't sit around waiting for permission to exist. That's not how things work here." It was the closest thing to kindness I'd received in months, this gruff permission to simply be. I moved to the shelves, taking inventory. Dried meat, grains, preserved vegetables, herbs, enough for one person to survive the winter comfortably, though it would be tight with 2. "The storm should break tomorrow," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "Day after at the latest. When it does, there's a settlement 3 days north. Mixed pack, more tolerant than most. I can take you there if you want. They might accept you. If you want." As if I had choices. As if the world was full of options for widowed omegas with nothing to their names. But I nodded, began preparing a stew from the available ingredients. We fell into a strange rhythm, me cooking, him maintaining the fire, both of us carefully avoiding too much proximity. The alpha scent that had overwhelmed me last night was still present, still affected me on a biological level, but he seemed acutely aware of it and kept his distance. "Why do you live out here alone?" I asked as we ate. The stew was better than his simple soup had been, and I felt a small spark of pride at his appreciative grunt, because cities and packs are full of politics and expectations. He set down his bowl. "Because after Elena died, I couldn't stomach the pitying looks and the well-meaning attempts to find me a new mate. Because I'm—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Because it's easier this way." "Easier for who?" His eyes snapped to mine, sharp and assessing. "You're more observant than you pretend to be." "I'm an Omega. We learn to watch, to read moods, to anticipate needs. It's survival." I held his gaze. "And you're a king, aren't you? Or were?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "I abdicated 3 years ago. Handed the crown to my brother and walked away." He stood, began clearing dishes. "Caused quite the scandal. Alphas don't just abandon power. It's not in our nature. But you did." "I did." He paused, hands gripping the edge of the table. "Because I was drowning in that palace. Every decision, every judgment, every pack dispute, it all required a clarity I no longer possessed. Better to step aside than fail everyone who depended on me. I understood that more than he knew. The feeling of being fundamentally broken, of fearing that your damage would contaminate everything you touched." "Do you regret it?" I asked softly. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Some days, most days, no. Out here I only have to manage my own demons, not an entire kingdom's." The day wore on. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the cabin felt almost peaceful. I cleaned, organized, found small ways to contribute. Dante worked on equipment maintenance, sharpening blades, mending leather, the kind of meditative tasks that kept hands busy and minds quiet. As evening fell, he pulled out a chess set, carved from dark and light wood. "Do you play?" "Daniel tried to teach me once. I wasn't very good." "Then you'll improve." He set up the board. "Playing against yourself gets boring." We played 3 games. I lost all 3, but each game lasted longer than the one before. He was patient when I forgot rules, ruthless when I made tactical errors, and by the 3rd game, I'd managed to capture one of his bishops. "Better," he said, resetting the pieces. "You're learning to think ahead. Hard habit to break for an Omega. We're taught to be reactive, not strategic." His hand stilled over a night. "Whoever taught you that was a fool. The best strategic minds I ever encountered were Omegas. They had to be. Survival demanded it." Something in my chest loosened at those words. Small validation, but validation nonetheless. That night, as I prepared to return to my room, he spoke again. "The settlement I mentioned. They're good people, but they'll have expectations. An unmated Omega will be valuable. They'll want you to choose a new mate quickly." I know. I'd known it from the moment they'd left me in the snow. Survival for Omegas always came with strings attached. "You don't have to go there," he said quietly. "You could stay until you figure out what you want. No expectations, no obligations, just somewhere safe to breathe for a while." I turned to look at him, this scarred king who'd given up everything to escape his own grief. "Why would you offer that?" "Because I know what it's like to have the world demand you move forward before you're ready." His pale eyes met mine. "And because you deserve better than being passed from pack to pack like unwanted cargo." That night, I lay awake in the small room, listening to the storm and thinking about choices, real choices, not just the illusion of them. For the first time in 6 months, maybe longer, I felt like I might actually have some. In the morning, I would tell him yes. I would stay, at least for a while, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because something in this broken king's careful kindness called to something equally broken in me. We were both learning to survive our grief. Maybe we could learn together. The storm broke on the 3rd day, leaving the world buried in silence and white. I woke to sunlight, actual sunlight, streaming through the window, so bright after days of gray that it hurt my eyes. The wind had finally stopped its howling, and in its absence, the forest seemed to hold its breath. I rose quickly, drawn to the window, and stared out at a landscape transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine over everything, turning the world into something clean and new. Dante was already outside, clearing a path from the door to the woodshed. He moved with purpose, his breath creating clouds in the crisp air. When he saw me watching from the window, he didn't wave or smile, just nodded once before returning to his work. I dressed and joined him, ignoring his raised eyebrow when I grabbed a second shovel from the shed. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," I interrupted, already digging. "But I want to." We worked in silence, falling into an easy rhythm. My muscles protested, unused to this kind of labor, but there was something satisfying about it. Something clean and simple. Move snow, clear path, see immediate results. No politics, no social hierarchies, no careful navigation of pack dynamics, just work. "You're stronger than you look," Dante observed after an hour, when we'd cleared a path to the well. "Omegas aren't fragile," I said, perhaps more sharply than I'd intended. "We're just taught to act like we are." A slight smile touched his lips. Fair point. We cleared paths to the storage shed, the woodpile, the small barn where he kept 2 horses. A fact that surprised me until I remembered that someone living in isolation would need transportation. The animals nickered softly when we entered, and Dante's entire demeanor shifted, became gentler, quieter. "This is Shadow," he said, stroking the nose of a massive black stallion. "And this is Ember." The mare was smaller, gray dappled with white, and she pushed her head against my hand when I offered it. "They're beautiful," I breathed. "They're survivors. Found Shadow half dead in a ravine 2 winters ago. Ember showed up at my door during a storm. No rider, no saddle. Someone abandoned her." He said it matter-of-factly, but I heard the underlying current. He collected broken things, this former king, gave them space to heal. We spent the morning tending the horses, mucking stalls, refreshing water, and feed. It was good, honest work, and I found myself relaxing into it. Here, with Dante, there was no pretense, no need to make myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. He simply let me be. Lunch was bread and the stew I'd made yesterday, reheated over the fire. We ate in comfortable silence, and I realized that silence between us had become easy, not awkward or oppressive, just restful. "I should check the northern boundary," Dante said, setting down his bowl. "Make sure the storm didn't bring down any trees across the trails. You can stay here, or—" "I'll come," I said quickly, then hesitated. "If that's all right." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Bundle up. It's colder than it looks." We set out an hour later, on foot, since the snow was still too deep for the horses. Dante moved through the forest with the ease of someone who knew every tree, every stone. I followed, stepping in his footprints to save energy, watching how he navigated the winter landscape. "How far does your territory extend?" I asked. "Technically, just the cabin and immediate clearing. But I patrol about 5 miles in each direction. Keep an eye on things." He paused to examine a fallen branch. "There are other cabins scattered through these woods. Hermits, mostly. People who want to be left alone. We have an understanding. We don't bother each other. But if someone's in genuine trouble, we help." "Is that common? Among alphas?" "No." He pulled the branch off the trail, tossed it aside. "Most alphas need pack, need hierarchy. Being alone goes against every instinct." His jaw tightened. "But instincts can be overridden when necessary." We walked for another hour, stopping occasionally to clear debris or mark trees that needed attention. The forest was beautiful in its winter sleep, silent except for the occasional bird call, the crunch of snow under our boots, peaceful in a way that the pack lands never had been, always full of noise and activity and judgment. "Do you miss it?" I asked suddenly. "Being king?" Dante was quiet for a long time, and I thought he might not answer. Then, "I miss the version of myself that could do it. Before Elena, before," he trailed off. "I was a good king, I think. Fair, strategic, but after she died, I became someone else. Someone angry and reckless and too broken to make sound decisions. You don't seem broken to me, he laughed. But there was no humor in it. You didn't see me in those first months. I nearly started a war with the Eastern Pax because I couldn't control my temper. Almost executed a counselor for a minor slight because I was looking for someone to blame for my pain. He shook his head. My brother intervened, forced me to see what I was becoming. And I realized he was right. I couldn't lead like that. Couldn't be responsible for thousands of lives when I could barely manage my own. I understood that fear, the terror of your own capacity for destruction. But you're better now, I said softly. Better, not fixed. He glanced at me. There's a difference. We reached a frozen stream, and Dante tested the ice carefully before crossing. On the other side, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there, almost hidden by snow, were the remains of a structure. Stone foundations, a collapsed chimney, charred timber. What was this? I asked. A cottage. Burned down about 10 years ago before I came here. No one knows who lived in it or what happened. He moved through the ruins with careful steps. But sometimes I come here to think. Reminds me that everything ends. Eventually. Even stone and timber. It should have been morbid, but instead, it felt oddly comforting. A reminder that grief and pain weren't permanent, that they too would crumble and be reclaimed by the forest. We stood there together, two broken people in the ruins of someone else's life, and I felt a connection forming. Not the instant, overwhelming mate bond that stories promised, but something quieter, something built on shared understanding, on mutual respect for each other's damage. Thank you, I said quietly, for letting me stay, for not what? Not treating me like I'm something to be managed, or fixed, or used. I met his eyes. For just letting me exist. Something shifted in his expression, became almost vulnerable. You make it sound like basic decency is exceptional. In my experience, it is. He nodded slowly, understanding. Then we're both lucky to have found someone who understands that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. We made our way back as the sun started its descent, painting the snow gold and pink. The cabin appeared like a haven, smoke rising from the chimney. I'd banked the fire carefully before we left. Inside, warmth and shelter and the beginning of something that might, eventually, be called home. That evening, I made dinner while Dante read by the fire. The scene was so domestic it almost hurt. This glimpse of what normal could be, what peace might feel like. After we ate, he taught me a card game, and I taught him a song my mother used to sing. His voice was rough and unpracticed, but he tried, and that mattered more than perfection. Later, as we prepared for sleep, he paused at the hallway. I've been thinking about what I said, about you staying. My heart sank. He was going to take it back, tell me I needed to leave after all. I meant it, he continued. For as long as you need. No timeline, no expectations. This isn't charity or pity. It's just, I think we help each other. You make the cabin feel less like a tomb, and he struggled for words. I like having someone here who understands silence. I'd like to stay, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being, if you're sure. I'm sure. He smiled then, a real smile that softened his scarred features. Besides, your cooking is significantly better than mine, purely selfish reasons. I laughed, surprised by the sound. When was the last time I'd laughed? Months, at least. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the knowledge that tomorrow I wouldn't have to leave. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. For the first time since Daniel died, maybe for the first time ever, I felt like I had agency over my own life. Outside, the winter stars burned cold and bright. Inside, something warmer was beginning to kindle, and neither of us was ready to name it yet. But we both felt it growing in the spaces between words, in the comfortable silences, in the careful way we were learning to orbit each other. Two broken planets, finding a new balance, two survivors, learning that survival might be just the beginning. 3 weeks passed like water through fingers. I fell into the rhythm of the cabin as naturally as breathing, waking with the sun, tending the horses, preparing meals, maintaining our small world. Dante and I moved around each other with increasing ease, our routines weaving together until it became difficult to remember what solitude had felt like. But the world outside our sanctuary hadn't forgotten us. They came on a morning bright with new snow. 6 alphas from the southern territories, their approach announced by Shadow's nervous whinnying. I was in the barn when I heard them, and every instinct screamed at me to hide, to make myself invisible the way I'd learned to do in Daniel's pack. Instead, I walked to the cabin. Dante was already outside, his posture relaxed but alert. I recognized that stance, the careful neutrality of someone preparing for conflict while hoping to avoid it. The visitors wore travel cloaks marked with the gray wolf insignia of the Greyhaven Pack, one of the larger southern alliances. "Lord Dante," the lead alpha said, his voice carrying poorly concealed surprise. "We'd heard rumors you were in the northern wilds, but—" "Not Lord anymore," Dante interrupted, his tone pleasant but firm. "Just Dante. What brings Greyhaven this far north?" The alpha, tall, auburn-haired, with the kind of polished confidence that came from never being challenged, gestured to his companions. "We're tracking a criminal, an Omega who stole from her pack before fleeing north. Blonde hair, late 20s, traveling alone." His eyes slid to me, standing in the cabin doorway. "Have you seen anyone matching that description?" My blood turned to ice. They were lying. I'd stolen nothing, owned nothing to steal, but the lie was convenient, a way to hunt me down legally, to drag me back and make an example of what happened to Omegas who survived when they were meant to die. "I've seen no one," Dante said smoothly. "As you can observe, I live alone." The auburn-haired alpha's eyes narrowed. "And yet there's an Omega standing right behind you." "My mate," Dante said, and the word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Recently bonded. You'll forgive us for seeking privacy during such a delicate time." I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The lie was enormous, protective, and utterly binding if they chose to verify it. But the alternative, being dragged back to Vincent's pack, being punished for the crime of surviving, was worse. "I see." The alpha's tone suggested he didn't believe it for a moment. "Then you won't mind if we speak with her directly. Verify she's here willingly." "I do mind, actually." Dante's voice dropped, became edged with something dangerous. "You're questioning my word, which suggests you've forgotten who I am. Abdication didn't strip my bloodline, just my title." The tension ratcheted higher. The other alphas shifted, hands moving toward weapons, and I saw the calculation in their eyes. 6 against 1. Even if that one was a former king, former warrior, former... "She's here willingly," I said, stepping forward. My voice shook, but I forced myself to meet the auburn-haired alpha's eyes. "I chose this. I chose him." "Funny," the alpha said, "because our information suggests you were widowed 6 months ago. Quick work, finding a new mate." "Grief doesn't follow your timeline," I shot back, surprised by my own boldness. "And my choices aren't subject to your approval." Something flickered across Dante's face. Approval, maybe, or surprise. He moved closer to me, not touching but creating a united front. "You have your answer. Now leave my territory." The standoff lasted another heartbeat. 2, 3. Then the auburn-haired alpha smiled, cold and knowing. "Of course. Congratulations on your bonding." He nodded to his companions, and they began to withdraw, but at the tree line, he turned back. "Though I wonder, if we return in a month, will we find evidence of this bond, or will we discover it was a convenient fiction?" "You're welcome to try," Dante said softly, dangerously. "Though I should warn you, I was a very effective king precisely because I eliminated threats before they could grow. Old habits die hard." The threat was unmistakable. The alphas left, but I knew we hadn't seen the last of them. We stood in silence until the forest swallowed them completely. Then Dante turned to me, ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have claimed you without permission, but it was the only way to—" "I understand," I said quickly, "and I'm grateful. But they'll come back, won't they, to verify the bond? Yes. He met my eyes. Which means we have a choice to make. We went inside, and he stoked the fire while I made tea with hands that wouldn't quite steady. The implications were staggering. A false mate claim was serious, punishable if discovered. But a real bond, even one of convenience, was permanent. We could run, I offered. Go further north, find somewhere they won't follow. They'll follow. Greyhaven doesn't let go of grudges easily, and they've clearly decided you're a useful pawn. Dante accepted the tea, stared into it. Or we could make the claim real. My heart stuttered. You mean a political bond, contractual? He spoke carefully, as if diffusing an explosive. No expectations beyond the public appearance. You'd have protection. No pack would challenge a bond with someone of my bloodline, and I'd have... He trailed off. Company? I suggested softly. Company, he agreed. An excuse for people to stop suggesting I return to court, marry strategically, produce heirs. We'd both get what we need: safety, autonomy, peace. It should have felt cold, this negotiation of a bond, but there was something almost tender in the way he presented it, giving me agency, offering partnership instead of dominance. What about the actual bond? I asked. It requires intimacy, the claiming bite, I know what it requires. His jaw tightened. And I would never ask that of you, but there are ways to simulate it: scent marking, public displays, even superficial marks that would pass initial inspection. By the time anyone questioned deeper, we'd be legally protected. That's fraud. It's survival. His eyes met mine, pale and honest. But only if you want it. I won't force this choice. If you'd rather take your chances elsewhere, I'll help you reach the northern settlements, give you supplies and letters of introduction. You'd have options. I thought about those options. Arriving at a strange pack, alone and vulnerable, forced to choose a mate quickly, or face rejection. Always wondering if Vincent's people would track me down, drag me back, punish me for the audacity of living. Or I could stay here with this scarred king who gave me space and silence, who let me exist without judgment, who looked at my damage and recognized it because he carried his own. I want to stay, I said. And if a bond is what it takes to be safe, then... yes, I agree. Something in his expression softened. You're sure? I'm sure. And I was. Not because I had no other choice, but because this choice felt right. Felt like choosing myself, my own peace, my own terms. We spent the rest of the day planning. Dante explained the bond ritual, simplified since we weren't doing the full claiming, but still requiring certain elements. Witnesses, vows, the exchange of blood and scent. He had contacts in the territory, hermits and outcasts who owed him favors, who could serve as witnesses without asking questions. We'll do it in 3 days, he said. That gives us time to prepare and for word to spread naturally. By the time Greyhaven returns, the bond will be established fact. That night, I lay awake thinking about the enormity of what I'd agreed to. A bond, even a political one, was forever. But hadn't I already learned that forever could be brief? That promises made in good faith could shatter like ice? At least this promise was honest. No pretense of love, no false vows of eternal devotion. Just 2 damaged people agreeing to protect each other from a world that wanted to use them. I could live with that. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Dante sent messages via a complex network of runners I hadn't known existed. I cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, prepared food for guests, tried not to think too hard about what was coming. On the 3rd evening, they began to arrive. An old woman named Petra, who lived in a cave system to the west, and had known Dante since his king days. 2 brothers, Marcus and Finn, who'd fought beside him in territorial wars. A quiet man called River, who spoke in gestures and had been exiled from his pack for being too gentle. Outcasts and survivors. Everyone. My people, I realized. Dante's people. We gathered around the fire as night fell. Dante had dressed in dark formal clothes that made him look every inch the king he'd been, and I wore a simple dress Petra had brought. Cream-colored, embroidered with silver thread. "We're here to witness a bond," Petra said, her voice carrying the weight of ritual. "Freely chosen, freely given. Dante, former king of the Northern Territories, and—" She looked at me expectantly. "Clara," I said, giving them my name for the first time. "Clara of Nopak." "Clara of Nopak," Petra repeated. "Do you both enter this bond of your own will, with clear minds and open hearts?" "Yes," Dante said. "Yes," I echoed. The ritual was simpler than traditional ceremonies, but no less powerful. We spoke vows of protection, of partnership, of mutual respect. Dante cut his palm, then mine, and we pressed them together, letting our blood mingle. Then came the scent marking. He stepped close, so close I could feel the heat of him, and bent to press his face against my neck. His scent, winter and forest, and something uniquely him, rolled over me, and my omega instincts responded with a purr I couldn't quite suppress. He froze, then slowly, carefully, scented me in return, and when he pulled back, his eyes had darkened with something that wasn't quite desire, but wasn't wholly strategic either. "It's done," Petra said quietly. "You are bonded in the eyes of pack law. May you find peace in each other." The witnesses left soon after, disappearing into the night as silently as they'd come. And then it was just us, standing in our cabin, bound together by blood and law and necessity. "Well," Dante said, his voice rough, That's that. I agreed. But as I lay in bed that night, his scent clinging to my skin, I wondered if we'd just made the cleverest decision of our lives, or the most dangerous one, because the bond had felt real. And that terrified me more than anything Greyhaven could do. The bond changed everything and nothing. Outwardly, life continued as before. Morning chores, shared meals, comfortable silences. But there was a new awareness between us, a hypervigilance to proximity and touch. When Dante's hand brushed mine passing a bowl, I felt it like static electricity. When I walked past him in the narrow hallway, the air itself seemed charged. We were playing a dangerous game, pretending at a bond that was supposed to be fiction. Except my body didn't know it was pretend. My omega instincts responded to his scent, his presence, his alpha nature with increasing intensity. And I caught him watching me sometimes, his expression unguarded and hungry before he'd look away. A week after the ceremony, Greyhaven returned. I was hanging laundry. Yes, even in winter things needed washing, when I heard the horses. 8 of them this time. The auburn-haired alpha plus reinforcements. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to continue my task, to appear unconcerned. Dante emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Back already?" I'd have thought Greyhaven had more pressing concerns than monitoring my domestic arrangements. "Lord Blackthorn sends his regards," the alpha said, dismounting. His name was Garrett, I'd learned from Petra. Second son, ambitious, cruel. And his curiosity about your sudden bond. Curiosity satisfied? Dante's tone was mild, but I recognized the steel beneath it. "Not quite." Garrett's eyes found me. "Lord Blackthorn requests the pleasure of your company at the midwinter gathering. Both of you. To formally introduce your mate to Southern society." It was a trap, obviously. Refuse, and they'd claim we were hiding something, attend, and we'd be under scrutiny, expected to perform a bond that was barely more than paperwork and scent. "We'd be delighted," I said, stepping forward before Dante could refuse. "When is the gathering?" Garrett's smile was sharp. 3 weeks, at the Greyhaven estate. He handed Dante a sealed letter. The formal invitation. "I'm sure you remember the protocols, my lord. Even abdicated kings must observe certain courtesies." They left, and Dante stared at the letter like it was a coiled snake. "We don't have to go," he said finally. "We could leave, head for the far territories where Greyhaven's influence doesn't reach. Running won't solve this." I took the letter from him, broke the seal, scanned the contents. Formal language, veiled threats, the expectation that we'd present ourselves for inspection like prized livestock. "They want to prove the bond is false." "Want to humiliate you?" Maybe leverage you back into politics. Yes. He took the letter back, fed it to the fire. Which is why going is dangerous. More dangerous than spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? I moved closer to him. Dante, if we do this right, if we can convince them the bond is real, they'll have to back off. Pack law protects bonded pairs. And if we can't convince them, his eyes searched mine, if they see through us, then we'll face that together. I surprised myself with the conviction in my voice. But I think we can do this. We've been living together, learning each other. We just need to lean into it, make it believable. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, that means practicing. Public displays of affection, intimate gestures, the kind of casual touching that bonded pairs do without thinking. My pulse quickened. I know. Clara. He said my name like a warning, like a prayer. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. This won't be comfortable. It means pushing boundaries, creating intimacy where there isn't any. Performing something that should be private and sacred. I know, I repeated. But it's still my choice. And I choose this. Choose us. Whatever us needs to be. The look he gave me was complex. Gratitude, concern, and something darker, more primal. All right. Then we start tomorrow. No half measures. If we're going to sell this, we need to believe it ourselves. That night, I lay awake planning. We had 3 weeks to transform a political arrangement into something that looked like love. 3 weeks to learn the language of touch, the performance of devotion. 3 weeks to lie convincingly enough to survive. Morning came too quickly. I found Dante in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast, and forced myself to approach him naturally. Placed my hand on his back as I reached for a mug, felt him tense, then deliberately relax. Good morning, I said, trying to make my voice warm, intimate. Morning. He turned, and we were suddenly very close, close enough that I could see the silver in his stubble, the fine lines around his eyes. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Sleep well? The gesture was tender, practiced. We were both trying too hard. This is terrible, I said, laughing despite myself. We look like strangers pretending to be lovers. A smile tugged at his mouth, because that's exactly what we are. He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair. Maybe we need to approach this differently. Instead of forcing intimacy, we build on what's already real. What do you mean? We're friends, aren't we? We trust each other, enjoy each other's company. That's real. He poured coffee, handed me a mug, our familiar morning ritual. So instead of acting like passionate new mates, we act like what we actually are, two people who chose each other for solid, practical reasons and have genuine affection underneath. It was brilliant in its simplicity. An established bond, comfortable, not performative. Exactly. Newer bonds are expected to be heated, all-consuming. But we've been bonded for weeks now. We should look settled, easy with each other. We spent the day practicing that ease. I leaned against him while he read. He draped an arm across my shoulders when we stood looking at the horses. Small touches, casual contact, the kind that spoke of habit rather than performance. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. Maybe because we'd already built a foundation of trust. Or maybe because some part of me had been wanting this closeness all along, had just needed permission to reach for it. The second week, we intensified. Petra visited, ostensibly to drop off supplies, really to observe and offer advice. You're too careful with each other, she said bluntly, watching us move around the kitchen. Bonded pairs occupy space together, not around each other. Clara, when you pass him, touch. Shoulder, arm, back. Doesn't matter. Just maintain contact. Dante, you're hovering. If she's your mate, you'd be more possessive. Not controlling, she added quickly, seeing my expression, but aware. Always knowing where she is, oriented toward her. We tried again, incorporating her feedback. I let my hand trail across Dante's shoulders as I moved past. He turned his body to track me across the room, that alpha focus I'd seen him use while hunting now directed at me. It was unnerving. It was also thrilling in a way I didn't want to examine. Better? Petra declared. Now the hard part. You need to smell like each other. Really smell, not just the surface scent from the ritual. That means sharing space, sharing clothes, sleeping in close proximity. Dante and I exchanged glances. We'd maintained careful separation since the bonding, separate rooms, separate lives braided together but distinct. How close? I asked. Petra gave me a knowing look. Close enough that your scents layer. Use each other's soap, wear each other's clothes when you sleep, spend time in enclosed spaces together. The bond scent needs to be undeniable. That night, Dante appeared at my door with an armful of his shirts. Petra's right. You should wear these, especially to sleep. And He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Wear mine? I pulled out several of my own tunics, handed them to him. They'd be tight on his larger frame, but that wasn't the point. We can do this, Dante. It's just practical. Right, practical. But his eyes lingered on the nightshirt I was wearing, one of his already, taken without asking because it was warmer than mine. The scent layering worked almost too well. Within days, I smelled like winter forests, and he carried hints of the lavender soap I preferred. People wouldn't need to look for a bond mark. They'd smell it on us from 20 paces. But it was the third week that truly changed things. We were practicing in the cabin, going through scenarios we might face at the gathering. Dante stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, radiating that possessive alpha energy while I leaned back against him, projecting omega contentment. What if they ask about the claiming bite? I asked. Some traditionalists inspect new bonds, want to see the mark. Dante's hands tightened briefly on my shoulders. I could give you one. A surface bite, enough to scar without the full bond. It would be painful, but no. I turned in his arms, surprising us both. No more half measures, no more illusions that could be disproved. If we're doing this, if we're really selling it, then, I took a breath. Then maybe we should make it real. He went very still. Clara, you can't mean... The full bond, I said, my heart hammering. Not the political version, not the simulation, the real thing. Absolutely not. He stepped back, putting distance between us. You don't know what you're asking. A claiming bond is permanent, irreversible. It's not something to enter into for strategy. Why not? I followed him. We've already bound ourselves legally. We've committed to protecting each other. The only difference is making it biological. The difference is enormous. His voice was rough. It means I'd feel your emotions, your pain. You'd feel mine. There's no privacy, no separation. And the drive to mate, to mark, to possess, he cut himself off. I won't do that to you, won't trap you in something that intimate based on necessity. What if it's not just necessity? The words escaped before I could stop them. What if I want this? Want you? Silence fell like snow. Dante stared at me, his pale eyes wide with something between hope and horror. Clara, I know it started as survival, I said, voice shaking. I know we built this bond on practical foundations, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real. And I'm tired of pretending that what I feel is just gratitude or companionship or strategic partnership. What do you feel? His voice was barely a whisper. I moved closer, placed my hand over his heart. Safe. Seen. Wanted. Not for what I can provide, but for who I am. Even the broken parts. I met his eyes. I feel like I found something I didn't know I was looking for, and if that's not what bonds are supposed to be built on, then I don't know what is. He caught my hand, pressed it harder against his chest where his heart raced. I can't give you the pretty romance you deserve. Can't promise I'll be easy to live with, or that my damage won't hurt you. I'm still learning how to be a person again. Not just a king, or a warrior, or I don't want pretty romance, I interrupted. I want real. I want you, exactly as you are. Scars, damage, withdrawn king who lives in the woods and rescues broken horses. I smiled through sudden tears. I want the man who gave me space to heal, who never once demanded anything, who looked at me and saw a person instead of a pawn. Clara. He said my name like he was drowning. If we do this, if I claim you, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me for life, and I... His jaw worked. I don't know if I can be what you need. You already are, I said simply. You have been since the night you opened that door. He pulled me into his arms then, held me so tightly I could barely breathe, and I felt the tremor run through him. I don't deserve this, he said against my hair. Don't deserve you. Neither of us deserves what we've been through, I said. But maybe we deserve this. Deserve choosing something good for ourselves. He pulled back just enough to see my face, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. You're sure? Absolutely certain? I'm sure. Then we do this right. His voice was firm now, decided. Not rushed, not desperate. We have a week before the gathering. We spend that week. He hesitated. Courting. Properly. I want you to be certain, and I want to give you the choice to change your mind every single day until the moment I bite. My heart swelled. Even now, even with everything laid bare, he was giving me autonomy. All right, court me. And he did. The next week was a revelation. Dante, stern, withdrawn Dante, could be playful. He left wildflowers he'd somehow found in winter on my pillow, taught me to track deer through the forest, his hands over mine as he showed me how to read prints. Cooked elaborate meals that were only slightly burned, cursing and laughing at his own ineptitude. We talked for hours, sharing stories we'd kept locked away. He told me about Elena, about the love that had been fierce and all-consuming, and about the guilt that had nearly destroyed him after. Not guilt for moving on, she'd have wanted that, but guilt for failing to save her, for all his power being useless in the face of nature's cruelty. I told him about Daniel, about a bond that had been comfortable but never passionate, about feeling relief mixed with grief when he died, because it meant I was finally free of a pack that had never truly accepted me. Is that terrible? I asked. To feel relieved? It's honest, he said. And honesty is worth more than perfect grief. On the 6th night, he took me to a hot spring he'd found in the forest. We bathed separately, still maintaining that last boundary. But afterward, we sat wrapped in furs beneath the stars, and he told me about the man he'd been before becoming king, about dreams of travel, of seeing the world beyond pack territories, of writing histories instead of making them. You could still do that, I said softly. After this is over, we could travel if you wanted. We. He tested the word, smiled. I like the sound of that. On the 7th night, the night before we'd leave for the gathering, he asked one final time. Are you certain? Once I claim you tomorrow night, once we appear before Greyhaven as truly bonded, there's no reversing it. You'll be bound to an exiled king with more scars than prospects. I took his face in my hands, felt the rasp of stubble against my palms, met those winter-pale eyes that had been the first thing to make me feel safe in longer than I could remember. I've never been more certain of anything, I said. Claim me. Make it real. Make me yours. His control finally snapped. He kissed me then, deep and desperate and full of all the wanting we'd been dancing around for weeks. Kissed me until I couldn't breathe, until the world narrowed to his mouth on mine, his hands in my hair, the low growl building in his chest. When he pulled back, his eyes had shifted. More wolf than man, alpha instincts rising. Now? Now, I agreed. He was gentle, despite the wildness I could see threatening his control. Careful, reverent even, as he bared my throat, his scent wrapped around me, pine and winter and home, and my omega nature rose to meet it, purring, accepting, wanting. This will hurt, he warned, his voice rough. I know. I trust you. The bite, when it came, was sharp and bright and perfect. Pain, yes, but also a rush of sensation unlike anything I'd ever felt, the bond snapping into place like a bridge being built between our souls. Suddenly I could feel him, his love, his fear, his desperate hope, his bone-deep relief at finally being chosen, being wanted, being enough. And he could feel me feel the way I'd been falling for him since that first night, feel the trust and affection and growing love I'd been afraid to name. When he pulled back, blood on his lips and wonder in his eyes, I smiled. "Your turn." He offered his throat without hesitation, and I bit down where instinct guided me, tasted copper and salt and alpha, felt the bond solidify from both directions. A circuit completed. We were one. Truly, permanently, irrevocably one. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the bond singing between us, and I'd never felt more complete. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," I said. "You?" "Only that I didn't do this sooner." He kissed my forehead. "I love you, Clara. Probably have since you first scowled at me over that chessboard." I laughed, pressed closer. "I love you too, even when you're brooding dramatically in the woods." We left for the gathering the next morning, bonded in truth and law, ready to face whatever Greyhaven threw at us. The estate was massive, full of alphas and their mates, all curious about the exiled king and his mysterious Omega. Garrett watched us like a hawk, looking for cracks, for evidence of deception, but there was nothing to find. When Dante touched me, I leaned into it instinctively. When I spoke, he oriented toward me automatically. Our scents were so intertwined that even the most suspicious had to acknowledge the bond was real. The formal inspection came on the second night. An elder, brought specifically to verify bonds, examined us in a private room, saw the claiming marks, fresh and unmistakable, scented the bond, deep and true, felt the connection when Dante took my hand, and I smiled without having to think about it. "Satisfied?" Dante asked coolly. The elder nodded slowly. "The bond is legitimate, recently completed, but genuine." He looked at Garrett, who'd insisted on attending. "They're legally bonded by all pack law. Unless you have other concerns?" Garrett's jaw worked, but he had no recourse. We'd won. Not through deception, but through truth. Through choosing each other and making it real. We stayed 3 more days, long enough to be polite, to remind everyone that even abdicated, Dante commanded respect. Then we went home. Home. Not to his cabin or my refuge, but ours. Together. Winter deepened, but inside we were warm. We settled into our bonded life with surprising ease, as if we'd been building toward this all along. Some days were hard, when old wounds resurfaced, or the bond meant feeling each other's pain too keenly, but we faced it together, learning to navigate this new intimacy. Spring came eventually, melting the snow and bringing green back to the forest, and with spring came a visitor, Dante's brother, the current king, arriving with a small retinue and a proposition. "The kingdom needs you," he said simply. "Not as king, but as advisor. You have wisdom I lack, experience I need, and Clara," he turned to me. "The people need an Omega in power who understands what it means to be discarded, who'll fight for those without voices." Dante and I exchanged glances, the bond thrumming with shared consideration. "We'd have autonomy?" Dante asked. "I won't be a puppet, and Clara won't be decorative. Full autonomy. You advise, advocate, make policy. But the crown remains mine." His brother smiled. "I learned from watching you. Power shared is power strengthened." We accepted. Not because we craved power, but because we could make things better. Could create a kingdom where Omegas weren't disposable, where the broken could find refuge, where strength meant compassion as much as dominance. Years passed. We split our time between the capital and our cabin, never fully leaving the woods that had saved us. We advocated, reformed laws, built networks for vulnerable Omegas, and slowly, the kingdom changed. I never forgot the night they left me in the snow. But I was grateful for it now, in a way. Because that abandonment led me here. To a scarred king who'd given up everything. To a love I'd never expected. To a life I'd chosen, rather than endured. One evening, years after that first desperate night, we sat on our cabin porch watching the sunset. Dante's arm was around me, our bond humming contentedly, and I felt his love wrap around me like a blanket. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't scented you that night?" he asked. "If I'd been deeper in the woods, if the wind had shifted?" I thought about it, about all the tiny choices and accidents that had brought us here. No, I said finally, because I think we were always going to find each other, one way or another. Some bonds are just inevitable. He kissed my temple. Inevitable. I like that. And as the sun set over our forest, our kingdom, our life, I realized that survival had been only the beginning. We'd found something far more precious than safety. We'd found home, in each other, in our chosen family, in the life we'd built from broken pieces, and it was everything.